The cake sits untouched in front of me, 21 perfect candles burning down to stubs. The room erupts in a chorus of happy birthday, but it's not for me, it's for him, again. I'm Jade, and today is my 21st birthday. Yet, I'm watching my parents throw a party for my brother, Alex, celebrating his latest internship offer. "Make a wish, champ," my father booms, his hand clasped proudly on Alex's shoulder, the same shoulder sporting the designer suit they bought him last week, while I'm stuck in a thrift store dress. Such a proud moment, my mother gushes, mascara smudged with happy tears. Stanford Law's top internship program. We always knew you were destined for greatness. My knuckles whiten around my fork, the metal biting into my palm as the room spins with their cheers. Aunt Carol dabs her eyes. Uncle Steve talks about connections at his firm. My cousin, Emily, catches my eye across the room, her expression mirroring my own disgust. "Speech! Speech!" someone calls out, and Alex stands, flashing that perfect smile that's gotten him everything he's ever wanted. "I just want to thank everyone for being here today," he starts. I can't help but notice how he's positioned himself in front of the happy birthday banner. My banner, hastily covered with congratulations streamers this morning. The words bubble up before I can stop them. Interesting timing for this celebration. The room goes quiet. My mother's smile freezes. "Jade, dear, let's not..." "Not what, Mother?" "Not mention that it's my birthday. Not mention how you converted my celebration into Alex's victory lap." "You're being dramatic," my father cuts in, his tone sharp. "This is a significant achievement for the family." "The family?" I laugh, and it sounds hollow even to my own ears. "You mean for Alex? Everything's always for Alex." Alex, at least, has the decency to look uncomfortable. "Sis, come on." "Don't sis me." I stand up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. 21 years of watching you get everything while I get the leftovers. Did you know I got accepted into Berkeley's writing program? Of course not, because when I told you last week, you were too busy planning this party. That's enough. My father's face is turning red. "You're embarrassing yourself." "In this family?" I snap back. The great David and Sarah, so focused on their golden child, they forgot they had a daughter. "Well, congratulations, you finally pushed me to my limit." My mother steps forward, her voice trembling. "If you can't appreciate what we've done for this family, perhaps you should..." "Should what? Leave? Is that what you want to say, Mother? Finally get rid of the disappointment?" "If that's how you feel," my father says coldly. "There's the door." The room holds its breath. I look around at the faces, shocked, embarrassed, carefully neutral. Only Emily and Grandma Helen show any sign of understanding. Fine. I grab my purse. "Happy birthday to me." "Jade," Alex calls after me, but I'm already walking out the door. The spring air hit my face, a mix of blooming cherry blossoms and freedom. It was a familiar scent, reminding me of childhood days spent climbing trees while Alex got private tennis lessons. My phone buzzed. It was Chloe. "Did you do it? Did you finally stand up to them?" My fingers shook as I typed back, "It's done. Can I crash at your place?" Her response was immediate. "Already setting up the spare room. And Jade, I'm proud of you." I took one last look at the house. The perfect lawn, the perfect windows with their perfect curtains, hiding the perfectly crafted lie of our family. Something shifted inside me, a switch flipping from hurt to determination. They wanted me gone, fine. But they were about to learn that the daughter they never wanted was the one they should have feared the most. Chloe's spare room felt like a life raft in a storm. 3 days had passed since I walked out, and the silence of not having to measure every word, every breath, was almost deafening. I sat cross-legged on the borrowed bed, staring at my phone's black screen. No missed calls, no texts, nothing. "Earth to Jade," Chloe said, leaning against the doorframe with 2 steaming mugs. "Your coffee is getting cold, and your interview outfit is getting wrinkled." I smoothed out the blazer laid across the bed. "Sorry, just thinking about..." "Don't." She handed me the coffee. "That's your 3rd time almost mentioning them." Today we're focusing on your future, remember? The coffee burned my tongue, but I welcomed the pain. It was better than the hollow ache in my chest. The urban grind interview was in 2 hours. I should probably... My phone buzzed. Grandma Helen's name lit up the screen. Jade, darling, are you safe? I'm okay, Gran. I'm staying with Chloe. Good girl. Listen carefully. I've been waiting for you to finally stand up to them. There are things you need to know, but not over the phone. Can you meet me at Riverside Park tomorrow? The usual bench? Before I could respond, I heard my mother's voice in the background. Grandma Helen quickly added, I have to go. Tomorrow, 10 gas, and hung up. Chloe raised an eyebrow. That sounded cryptic. Gran's always been different from the rest of them. She actually sees me. I stood up, straightening my blazer. But right now, I need this job. I can't keep crashing here without contributing. Please, Chloe scoffed, throwing a cushion at me, as if I'd let you pay rent. But you're right about the job. You need your own money if you're really cutting ties. The urban grind sat on the corner of maple-lined Cedar Street, its brick facade warm and inviting. Inside, the interview room smelled like freshly ground coffee and possibility. Your application is impressive, the manager Sarah said. But there's a gap in your references. No family contacts. I met her eyes steadily. I prefer to keep my professional and personal life separate. She nodded, something knowing in her expression. Fair enough. When can you start? Walking out with a job offer and a training schedule, I almost missed Alex leaning against my car. Nice ride, he said, tapping the rusty fender of my second-hand Honda. Better than walking, I guess. What do you want? To talk. You're still my sister, Jade. Funny, I don't remember you mentioning that at the party. He ran a hand through his perfect hair, a nervous tic I recognized from childhood. Look, I didn't know they were going to hijack my birthday? I tried to tell them. Save it. I unlocked my car door. You've never had to try for anything in your life, Alex. Everything's just handed to you while I scrape by. Did you know they promised to pay for my college, too? Funny how that money disappeared right when your law school deposits were due. His face paled slightly. I didn't know exactly. You never know because you never have to look. Must be nice in that bubble of yours. Mom and Dad are worried. They want you to come home. I laughed, and it sounded bitter even to my own ears. Home? That stopped being my home the day they decided I was worth less than you. Tell them I said thanks for the birthday gift. Clarity looked good on me as I drove away. My phone buzzed with a text from Emily. Found something in Uncle David's study. You need to see these papers. Can you meet tonight? I glanced in my rearview mirror. Alex was still standing there, looking lost for maybe the first time in his life. Good. Let him feel a fraction of what I've felt for years. Tomorrow, I'd meet Grandma Helen and hear whatever she needed to tell me. Tonight, I'd see what Emily had found. The pieces were moving, and for once, I wasn't just a pawn in someone else's game. Chloe was waiting when I got back, victory cupcake in hand. Got the job. Start training tomorrow. I took the cupcake but didn't eat it. Chloe, I need to ask you something. If this gets ugly, really ugly, are you sure you want to be involved? She took my hand, squeezing it tight. Honey, I've watched them dim your light for years. It's about time someone helped you shine. I squeezed back, thinking of Grandma Helen's cryptic call and Emily's message. Then let's get started. The morning air bit at my face as I hurried through Riverside Park. Grandma Helen was already at our bench, her silver hair catching the autumn light. She held a thick manila envelope, her fingers trembling slightly as she gripped it. You look tired, darling, she said as I sat beside her. First week at the new job, everything hurts except my pride. I tried to smile, but Grandma Helen's expression stopped me. What's wrong? She pressed the envelope into my hands. These are copies of documents I found in your father's study last year. Bank statements, transfer records, letters, the truth about your college fund. Inside were papers dating back 5 years. My fingers went numb as I scanned the numbers. This can't be right. There's over $200,000 here. Your grandfather set up trust funds for both you and Alex before he died, equal amounts. Grandma Helen's voice hardened. Your father was supposed to be the trustee until you turned 21, yesterday. The world tilted sideways. But they said they couldn't afford my tuition. That's why I had to take out loans, They transferred your money to Alex's account. Gradually, over years, private schools, sports camps, that ridiculous car. She took my hand. I tried to stop it, but David threatened to cut off my access to the family if I interfered. My phone buzzed. Emily was calling. I ignored it, my hand shaking as I flipped through more documents. Does Alex know? No. He's as much a victim of their manipulation as you are, just in a different way. They've made him dependent, entitled. Another buzz. Emily again. This time I answered. Jade, thank God, you need to get home right now. Your father found out I was in his study. He's destroying everything. My heart stopped. What do you mean? Destroying papers, files, everything. He knows someone's been looking into the accounts. He's in a complete panic. Grandma Helen grabbed my arm. Go now. I'll make copies of these. I drove like a woman possessed, reaching my parents' house in record time. Emily met me at the side door, her face pale. They're in the study. Your mom's trying to calm him down, but... A crash from upstairs cut her off. We raced up together, finding the study door locked. Open this door! I pounded on the wood. I know what you did with my trust fund. Silence fell inside, then my father's voice, eerily calm. You don't understand anything, Jade. I understand enough. $200,000, Dad? My future. You stole it. We invested it in your brother's future. The family's future. My mother's voice, now strained. Everything we did was for this family. No, I said, my voice steady despite the rage burning in my chest. Everything you did was for Alex, and now everyone's going to know. The door flew open. My father stood there, papers scattered around him, a waste paper basket smoldering with half-burned documents. You wouldn't dare destroy this family's reputation. You already did that yourself. I held up my phone, recording. And now I have proof. His face contorted. You ungrateful... David! My mother grabbed his arm as he stepped toward me. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Emily slipped past them into the study, quickly gathering fallen papers. I'm done covering for you, Uncle David. This ends now. You're both making a terrible mistake, my mother said, but her voice wavered. I laughed, and it sounded like breaking glass. No, the mistake was thinking you could get away with this forever. The mistake was believing I'd stay quiet. The mistake was forgetting that I'm your daughter too. My father slumped against his desk, suddenly looking old. You don't understand what pressure we were under. Alex's future. Save it for the lawyers. I turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and happy birthday to me. Finally got my inheritance after all. Outside, Emily handed me the salvaged papers, her hands shaking. What now? My phone buzzed with a text from Grandma Helen. Documents safe. Your grandfather would be proud. Now, I said, watching my parents' silhouettes in the study window. We make them face everything they tried to burn away, and we do it together. The autumn wind whipped around us, carrying away the smell of burned paper and lies. For the first time since my birthday party, I felt truly, completely alive. The annual family reunion invitation sat on Chloe's coffee table like a loaded gun. I'd been staring at it for an hour, the gold embossing catching the afternoon light. This year's host, Alex. It was perfect. Everyone will be there, Emily said through my phone speaker. The whole family will have to face what they did. I traced the embossed letters. Alex is hosting at the lake house. That's where your grandfather signed the trust documents, Grandma Helen finished, her voice joining Emily's on the conference call. David won't expect you to know that detail. Alex came by yesterday, Grandma Helen said, hesitating. He's different. Asked about you, about why you really left. The doorbell rang. I froze, but Chloe was already opening it. Alex stood there, looking uncertain in a way I'd never seen before. "Can we talk?" He glanced at my phone. "Alone?" I ended the call, nodding to Chloe as she slipped into her bedroom. Alex sat across from me, his eyes falling on the papers spread across the table. "I found some interesting documents in Father's study," he said quietly. "About my car, my schools, your missing college fund. How much do you know?" "Enough to make me sick." He ran his hands through his hair, that nervous tick again. "I swear, Jade, I had no idea. I thought they were just better off than they let on. They were, with my money. I'll pay it back, all of it. I've already talked to my bank about, this isn't about the money anymore." I met his eyes. "This is about years of lies, about them making you their golden child while treating me like I didn't exist, about them burning evidence when they realized I knew." He picked up the reunion invitation. "That's why I'm hosting. I want you there, Jade. Help me make this right." "Make it right?" I laughed, but it caught in my throat. "You can't just write a check and fix this." "No, but I can help you expose them." His voice dropped. "Father's been moving money around, not just yours. There are other accounts, other families involved. Aunt Carol's kids' inheritance, Uncle Steve's business loans." My heart stopped. "How deep does this go?" "Deep enough to destroy him, to destroy them both." He pulled out his phone, showing me screenshots of bank statements, the lake house party. It's not just a reunion. Father's planning to announce his retirement, hand everything over to me, his company, his reputation, his secrets. I studied my brother's face, looking for any trace of manipulation. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you're my sister. Because I was too blind to see what they were doing to you. Because," he swallowed hard, "because I need your help to stop them before they do this to anyone else." The invitation seemed to pulse with new meaning. The whole family would be there. Everyone they'd ever stolen from, everyone they'd lied to. Alex's hands clenched. "Help me end this, Jade. Not just for you, for all of us." I stood, walking to Chloe's window. The street below was filling with evening traffic, people heading home to their normal families, their uncomplicated lives. "If we do this," I said finally, "we do it my way. No warnings, no chances for them to hide more evidence." "Agreed." Alex stood too. "But Jade, there's something else you should know, about Grandma Helen." My stomach dropped. "What about her?" "She didn't just find those documents last year. She's been tracking their schemes for decades, and..." He hesitated. "She has proof that this started before we were even born. With our real inheritance, the one our grandfather never meant for Father to control." The pieces clicked together. Grandma Helen's careful questions over the years, her subtle support, her determination to keep me independent. "The reunion's in 2 weeks," Alex said, heading for the door. "Whatever you decide, I'm done being their puppet." After he left, Chloe emerged. "Well?" I picked up the invitation, feeling its weight. "Call Emily and Grandma Helen. We need to move faster than we planned." "Are you sure about trusting Alex?" I thought about his nervous tick, his screenshots, the sick look in his eyes. "No. But I'm sure about one thing. This just got bigger than revenge." The invitation caught the last ray of sunlight, glinting like a blade. The lake house loomed ahead as I drove up the winding road, its windows reflecting the setting sun like warning signals. 3 days until the reunion, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Alex's car was already parked out front, along with Grandma Helen's old Mercedes. I found them in the study, surrounded by papers and laptops. Grandma Helen looked up first, her face tight with worry. "It's worse than we thought, darling." Alex turned his laptop toward me. "Father's been moving money through shell companies for years. Not just family funds, corporate accounts, client trusts, everything." The screen showed a maze of transactions, each one leading back to familiar names. Aunt Carol's children's college funds, Uncle Steve's failed business loans, Cousin Thomas's medical care money. "He's built his entire empire on stolen futures," Grandma Helen said quietly. "Your grandfather suspected, but could never prove it." My phone buzzed. A text from Emily. Uncle David just left our house. He knows something's wrong. Be careful. We need to move faster, Alex said, running his hands through his hair. He's already started transferring assets overseas. Once that's done, he'll disappear with everything. Including the proof, I finished. Grandma Helen touched a stack of old letters. There's something else. Your mother. She's not just complicit. She's been the architect of all this. The accounting, the cover-ups, the manipulations, they're all in her handwriting. The room spun slightly. I gripped the back of a chair, feeling the smooth wood under my fingers. All those times she pushed me aside, she wasn't just favoring Alex. She was protecting their scheme. Jade? Alex's voice was strange. There's more. Look at this. He handed me a document dated 21 years ago, my birth certificate, with an attached insurance policy. A life insurance policy in my mother's name. She took it out the day you were born, Grandma Helen whispered. $5 million, payable only if I died before 21. The words tasted like ash. That's why they threw Alex's party on my birthday. They were celebrating that the policy expired, that they didn't have to. The study door slammed open. My mother stood there, her perfect makeup not quite hiding her fury. What are you doing here? Laura, Grandma Helen started, but my mother cut her off. You've poisoned them against us, haven't you, Margaret? Filled their heads with lies about their father. The only lies here are yours, I said, holding up the insurance policy. Were you disappointed when you didn't get to cash this in? Something flickered in her eyes. Not guilt, but frustration. You don't understand what it takes to build something lasting, to secure a legacy. By betting on your daughter's death? Alex stood, his face pale. By stealing from our entire family? Everything we did was for you, Alex. For your future. She stepped forward, reaching for him. We can still protect that future together. Just help me gather these papers, and we can... My voice didn't shake anymore. Every word you say just proves what you really are. What you've always been. And what's that? Her smile was razor sharp. A monster who saw her children as investments. Nothing more. She laughed, and it sounded like breaking glass. Oh, darling, you have no idea what real monsters look like, but you will. She pulled out her phone. David, they're here, all of them. Yes, with the documents. Of course, I'm sure. It's time to implement contingency plan B. The line went dead, and my mother's smile widened. You have 30 minutes to leave this house and forget everything you've seen. After that? She shrugged elegantly. Well, accidents do happen at lake houses, even to adults. You're threatening us? Alex stepped between her and me. Your own children? I'm protecting our legacy, as I always have. She turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Jade? Happy belated birthday? Such a shame you won't make it to 22. After she was gone, Grandma Helen grabbed her keys. We need to move now, get everything to my car. But I was staring at the insurance policy, something clicking into place. No, we stay. The reunion's in 3 days. Everyone will be here. I met Alex's eyes, seeing my own determination reflected back. Let them come. All of them. It's time they saw what real monsters look like in the daylight. Grandma Helen touched my arm. And if your parents follow through on their threat? I picked up my mother's forgotten phone, left deliberately on the desk. Then they'll have to explain a lot more than missing money to the police, because I just recorded every word. The lake house windows darkened with the setting sun, no longer reflecting warnings, but promises. In 3 days, everything changes, one way or another. The lake house filled with relatives as evening fell, their chatter echoing off the walls like accusations. I stood in the corner of the great room, watching my father work the crowd with practiced charm. My mother floated between groups, her laugh just a touch too bright. Alex hadn't arrived yet. Quite the turnout, Emily whispered, appearing at my elbow. Aunt Carol's been crying in the bathroom, something about Thomas's medical bills coming due. My phone buzzed, a text from Alex. Delayed. Someone broke into my apartment. All the documents are gone. The room suddenly felt too small, too warm. I slipped onto the balcony, gripping the railing until my knuckles turned white. Another buzz. Police are here. Father's name came up in their questions. Problems? My mother's voice made me jump. She stood in the doorway, backlit by the party lights, looking more predator than parent. Such a shame about Alex's break-in. These things happen when people don't properly secure their belongings. What did you do? Me? She sipped her wine. I'm just a devoted mother celebrating her son's success. Speaking of which, your father's about to make his big announcement. You wouldn't want to miss it. Inside, my father tapped his glass for attention. Family, friends, thank you all for coming to celebrate Alex's achievement in hosting his first family gathering. But I have an even bigger announcement. The crowd murmured expectantly. I scanned the room. No Grandma Helen, no Alex. My chest tightened. As of tonight, I'm officially retiring, my father continued, and I'm proud to announce that Alex will be taking over as CEO of our family enterprise. Applause broke out. Uncle Steve raised his glass, his smile strained. Though some of us are still waiting on those business loans you promised, David. All in good time, my father said smoothly. In fact, I have some papers here that should interest several of you regarding your investments. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. My heart stopped. They were forgeries. They had to be. The real papers were gone, stolen from Alex's apartment. Jade! My mother's hand closed around my arm, her nails digging in. Why don't you join me in the study? We need to discuss your future. Let go of me. Now. Dear, her grip tightened, before you embarrass yourself again. The study door clicked shut behind us. My father was already there, along with two men I didn't recognize. Meet our security consultants, my mother said. They're very good at handling delicate situations, like breaking into Alex's apartment. My father sighed. Alex made his choice. Disappointing, but manageable. You, however, he nodded to one of the men, who moved to block the door. You've become a liability we can no longer afford. The insurance policy expired, I said, backing away. You can't... Oh, darling, my mother laughed. There are so many ways to have accidents, especially at lake houses, especially after drinking too much at family gatherings. A glass appeared in her hand, my glass, from earlier. Your fingerprints, your DNA, combined with your history of emotional instability and recent erratic behavior. The second man stepped forward, something glinting in his hand. My back hit the wall. Why? My voice cracked. I'm your daughter. No, my father said quietly. You're a mistake I should have corrected years ago. The door burst open. Alex stood there, bloody and disheveled. Police are on their way. I triggered the silent alarm when I saw your security consultants following me. Alex, my mother started, but he cut her off. Save it. I heard everything. He held up his phone. And so did the detective who's been investigating your financial fraud for the past year. Sirens wailed in the distance. The security men exchanged glances, then slipped out a side door. My father's face contorted with rage. You ungrateful! He lunged for Alex. I moved without thinking, grabbing the heavy paperweight from his desk. The impact dropped him to his knees. My mother screamed, but it was drowned out by the sound of breaking glass and shouting from the great room. Grandma Helen's voice rose above the chaos. The real documents are being projected on the wall right now. Every transaction, every theft, every lie. My father struggled to his feet, blood trickling from his temple. You've destroyed everything. No, I said, my voice steady despite my shaking hands. You did that yourself, years ago, when you decided money was worth more than your children's love. The sirens grew louder. My mother backed away, her perfect mask finally cracking. David, the offshore accounts are frozen, Alex finished, along with everything else. Blue lights flashed through the windows as police cars filled the driveway. I looked at my parents, really looked at them, and felt nothing but pity. "Happy retirement, Father," I said, and walked out to face whatever came next. The great room erupted into chaos as the projector displayed decades of financial records across the wall. Aunt Carol collapsed into a chair, Uncle Steve hurled his glass across the room, and cousins I hadn't spoken to in years started shouting, all at once. My father stood frozen at the front of the room, his retirement speech forgotten. My mother's perfect smile cracked like thin ice. "Those documents are fabricated," she announced, but her voice wavered. "This is nothing but a desperate attempt by our jealous daughter to—" "To what, Mother? Tell the truth?" I stepped forward, Alex at my side. "About how you stole from everyone in this room? About the life insurance policy you took out on me? About how you were willing to kill your own daughter tonight to keep your secrets?" The room fell silent. Even the police officers who just entered paused, hands on their weapons. "Everything we did," my father started, then stopped as Grandma Helen walked in, carrying a familiar leather briefcase. "Is that what you told yourself, David? When you forged your father's signature on those trust documents?" She opened the briefcase, pulling out yellowed papers. "Or when you and Laura orchestrated my husband's accident after he threatened to expose you?" My mother's composure shattered. "You can't prove—" "Actually, she can." Alex's voice was steel. "Grandfather's original autopsy report. The one you buried. The one showing poison in his system." My father lunged for the briefcase, but the police were faster. As they read him his rights, he locked eyes with me. "You ungrateful child," he spat. "We gave you everything." "No." My voice didn't shake anymore. "You took everything. My inheritance, my education, my childhood. You even tried to take my life. We were protecting the family legacy," my mother shrieked as an officer approached her. "Everything was for this family." "Was it?" I gestured to the room, to the devastated faces of our relatives. "Look around, Mother. Look at all the lives you've destroyed. The children who couldn't afford college, Thomas's medical bills, Uncle Steve's failed business. Also, you could build Alex into your perfect heir." "I never wanted that." Alex stepped forward. "I never wanted any of it." My mother's face twisted. "Then you're as weak as she is. All our sacrifices wasted." "Sacrifices?" I laughed, and it sounded like breaking chains. "You sacrificed nothing. You stole, you lied, you murdered. And for what? To feel powerful? To play God with other people's lives?" "You don't understand what it takes to build something lasting," my father said, echoing my mother's words from earlier. But now they sounded hollow, desperate. "I understand perfectly." I pulled out my phone, playing the recording of their threats in the study. "I understand that you're not parents. You're not even human. You're just empty shells, so afraid of losing control that you destroy your own children to keep it." As the police led them away, my mother turned back one last time. "This isn't over, Jade. Families like ours don't air their dirty laundry. No one will believe. Everyone already believes." Emily pointed to the windows, where news vans were pulling up. "The whole story is going live right now. Every transaction, every threat, every crime." My father slumped in defeat, but my mother struggled against the officers. "You've destroyed everything." "No, Mother." I watched as they were led away, feeling nothing but a profound emptiness. "I've set everyone free, including myself." The room buzzed with shocked conversations and legal discussions. Aunt Carol hugged me, crying about finally being able to send her kids to college. Uncle Steve talked with the detective about recovering his stolen funds. Thomas's mother thanked me through tears. Alex touched my arm. "You okay?" "I don't know." I looked around at the wreckage of our family's facade. "Are any of us?" "We will be." Grandma Helen appeared beside me, her eyes fierce with pride. "Your grandfather would be proud, darling. You've done what he couldn't. Expose the truth." "The truth," I repeated, tasting the word. It felt different now, less like revenge and more like justice. "What happens next?" "Next," Emily joined us. linking her arm through mine. We rebuild, but this time on a foundation of truth. Through the windows, I watched my parents disappear into separate police cars. The life they built on lies crumbling behind them, but in its ruins, I saw something unexpected. Hope. Not just for me, but for everyone they hurt. The lake house stood silent, its secrets finally exposed to the light, and in that light, I found something I never expected to feel. Freedom. Story 2. I didn't feel like I belonged in Maple Grove Estates as a child. The enormous homes, immaculate lawns, and fancy automobiles in every driveway appeared to make fun of our humble living arrangements. My name is Emma Mitchell, and my narrative starts with a BBQ that had a profound impact on my life. When I was 5 years old, my parents, Thomas and Linda Mitchell, moved into 156 Maple Drive. Back then, the neighborhood was different, warmer, more accepting. However, the sense of community gradually deteriorated into something chilly and exclusive as real estate values surged and affluent families settled in. Our house was a noticeable oddity. While others remodeled and extended, we kept our humble two-story home the best we could. Mom had a tiny flower store downtown, while Dad taught high school. Although we weren't impoverished, we may as well have been in that situation given our neighbors. We were constantly reminded of our position in the social ladder by Sarah Henderson, who lived in the mansion next door. Every time we saw each other, her husband James, the CEO of a tech company, would smirk from behind his imported cigars. They symbolized everything wrong with what Maple Grove had become, but without warmth, prosperity, without spirit. The yearly neighborhood BBQ has long been a ritual extending back decades. It was the Hendersons' turn to host this year. Dad insisted that we keep up appearances even though Mom didn't want to go. He had straightened his collar in the mirror and remarked, "We have as much right to be here as anyone else." If only he were aware of his correctness. That afternoon, I helped Mom create her renowned potato salad. She said, "Perhaps this year will be different," but her tone was unconvinced. Not believing it either, I nodded. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something important was going to happen as we carried our potluck contribution next door. Men in polo shirts talked about stock portfolios and golf handicaps, while women in designer sundresses gathered around the pool in the Hendersons' backyard. Sarah's flawlessly Botox face twisted into a rehearsed grin of the Mitchells as soon as she saw us. "How kind of you to join us, Linda dear," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "That's yours to put." She made a hazy gesture toward the other dishes and her mother's potato salad over there. When Mom arranged her meticulously prepared dish among the catered spreads, I saw her face flush. I could see the pain in Dad's eyes as he squeezed her hand. We grabbed seats at an empty table toward the perimeter of the party. With a sinking feeling, I recognized it as the only table that was empty. The subtle jabs became less frequent as the afternoon went on. As Sarah spoke to her equally affluent friends about property values, her voice could be heard clearly across the yard. She pointed to our house and said, "It's just that some properties really bring down the neighborhood's appeal." "James, don't you agree?" James Henderson gave a wise nod while lowering his crystal Scotch tumbler. "Yes, sweetheart. We spoke with the Homeowners Association about this. Maybe it's time to establish some new guidelines." My blood boiled, but years of enduring the condescension had taught me to keep my composure. I was about to suggest to my parents that we leave when I noticed an unfamiliar figure walking up the Hendersons' driveway. Even James's expensive outfit looked cheap in comparison to the man's immaculate suit. He walked purposefully toward the group, carrying a leather briefcase. Conversations quieted and heads turned. "I'm looking for Emma Mitchell," he'd announce, his voice clear and professional. Sarah's eyebrows shot up as I stood. "That's me," I said, trying to ignore the whispers that erupted around us. The man nodded and extended his hand. "Jonathan Pierce from the legal practice of Pierce & Associates. I speak for Harold Montgomery's estate. Permit me to talk in private." The name hit me like a thunderbolt. Harold Montgomery, my grandfather, whom I never met. He'd had a falling out with my father decades ago, long before I was born. All I knew about him came from old photographs and whispered conversations. Sarah, unable to contain herself, sashayed over. "Now, surely any business can wait until after our little gathering," she said, placing herself between me and Mr. Pierce. "We wouldn't want to disrupt the party, Mr. Pierce?" His expression remained neutral, but his eyes hardened slightly. "I'm afraid this matter is rather urgent, Mrs. Henderson. Or should I say tenant?" The word hung in the air like smoke. Sarah's perfect smile faltered. "I beg your pardon. Maybe we should all take a seat, Mr. Pierce offered, opening his suitcase. "This involves the entire neighborhood, actually." The next few minutes thought surreal as Mr. Pierce explained that my grandfather, Harold Montgomery, had been the actual owner of all of Maple Grove Estates. He owned the land decades ago, but preferred to reside elsewhere, letting a management firm to oversee the assets. The Hendersons, like everyone else, had been renting from him all these years through a complicated network of shell businesses. "Your grandfather passed away last month," Mr. Pierce said, addressing me directly in his well. "He bequeathed the entire estate, including all of Maple Grove, to you, Miss Mitchell." The ensuing hush was deafening. Sarah's face had gone pale, her manicured fingers grabbing James' arm so firmly her knuckles went white around us. Our neighbors watched in startled astonishment. "That's impossible," James spat, finally finding his words. "We own this house. We have the deed," Mr. Pierce said. "You have a well-written lease agreement." Bringing out a pile of papers. "In reality, your monthly property taxes have been used to cover your rent." Mr. Montgomery organized everything in a very clever way. As I sat there, I found it difficult to comprehend what I was hearing. I felt so low since the house had grown up in the area. My grandpa had owned it everything, and now suddenly, it all belonged to me. Sarah's voice rose as she replied, "There must be some mistake. We've spent 15 years here. According to your lease agreement, we have made hundreds of thousands of dollars in renovations, all of which were authorized by the management firm," Mr. Pierce gently answered. "All of Maple Grove Estates properties are now completely under Miss Mitchell's control." I glanced at my parents, who seemed just as surprised. Dad's expression was a mixture of astonishment, perplexity, and another feeling. Pride. "I'm sorry, I was unable to tell. Standing, if you will pardon us, Mr. Pierce remarked. "I need to talk to Miss Mitchell about some papers. Shall we use your study, Mrs. Henderson? It's now Miss Mitchell's property after all." As I followed Mr. Pierce into the home, I heard the celebration collapsing into mayhem behind me. Sarah's voice cut through the crowd, demanding answers and threatening legal action. Her remarks, however, had no effect on me for the first time in my life. Mr. Pierce outlined my whole inheritance inside the Henderson research. The community was only the first step. I needed to know about other homes, investments, and accounts, but I kept thinking about the same thing. Was he aware? Abruptly, I questioned my granddad. Was he aware of their treatment of us? Mr. Pierce? His face softened somewhat. Mr. Montgomery had eyes and ears everywhere. "He saw you grow up from a distance, Miss Mitchell. Adversity was somehow handled gracefully by you and your parents. He frequently expressed his pride in the family you grow up to be in his latter years." My eyes filled with tears as I remembered the grandfather I had never met, watching over us all these years. As neighbors hurried to their phones, probably to call their attorneys, I could hear the party outside completely disintegrating. Now what? I woke up and said, "Miss Mitchell is totally up to you. The property releases Maple Grove's future. It's entirely up to you." I gave a nod. I already have a plan in mind. For years, the Hendersons had made us feel inferior, but now the roles had been reversed. What I wanted to be as a landlord was the actual question. I awoke the following morning to anarchy. Like wildfire, word of my inheritance had swept over Maple Grove. There were several congratulations texts on my phone. Many neighbors now wanted to reconnect, while others frightened. Sarah Henderson's number kept coming up, and her voicemails got more desperate. It seems that James had called all the attorneys in the city throughout the night, only to find that my grandfather's legal team had solid proof of everything. Like every other morning, I sat at our kitchen table and watched my mother make breakfast, but this time, something felt different. Dad kept peeking at the window, where a small gathering of neighbors had gathered. likely trying to catch a sight of the neighborhood's new owner. "Sweetheart, what are you thinking?" Mom put a plate of pancakes in front of me and asked. I inhaled deeply. Grandpa is on my mind, what he wanted me to know, and why he did this. As I stopped eating my pancakes, I thought about all the families just like us who had been forced to leave our area throughout the years. He raised his head from his coffee. "Your grandfather." "Emma, he was a complex man. He always had a strong sense of fairness, even though we didn't always agree." We were talking when there was a knock on the door. Despite the early hour, Mr. Pierce appeared fresh as he stood there. "Miss Mitchell, good morning. I thought you would want to look at the terms of the current lease. We ought to talk about a few intriguing clauses." I smiled when a photo appeared among the paperwork we were going over. My grandpa had been more than simply a clever businessman. It had been a long game for him. All of the leases had clauses that provided the owner exceptional authority over terms of rental and community standards. I said, I could basically rewrite the entire rental agreement with proper notice, referencing a particularly intriguing clause. "Yes, Mr. Pierce verified. "Your grandpa made sure the property owner had the most flexibility possible. I spent the next 3 hours creating new terminology with Mr. Pierce's guidance." We had everything prepared by the afternoon. At another property I now controlled, the neighborhood clubhouse, I held an obligatory community meeting. That night, the clubhouse was full. With a mixture of curiosity and concern, every Maple Grove inhabitant had shown their faces. Despite their evident distress, Sarah and James Henderson sat in the front row, attempting to preserve their customary air of superiority. "Thank you all for attending." I started to stand at the podium. "Your landlord, as you are now aware, after going over everyone's lease papers all day, I've made the decision to make a few adjustments." A whisper swept through the audience. Sarah's hand flew up at once, but I went on talking. "First, rather than using exorbitant rates, our present rentals will be modified in accordance with a fair market value evaluation. A lot of you have been making payments. Second, members from all income levels will be on the community board I'm creating. And third," I paused, making eye contact with Sarah, "the lease shall be immediately terminated for any kind of harassment or discrimination based on financial status." The room exploded. With a start, James Henderson stood up. "This is ridiculous. You can't make all the changes at once. We have rights." "Actually, Mr. Henderson?" Mr. Pierce interjected nicely. "According to your lease agreement, she can." "Do you want to go over the conditions you agreed to 15 years ago?" I went on as James sputtered. "Retaliation doesn't interest me. What I want is to restore this neighborhood to what it was meant to be, a community where people of different backgrounds can live together with respect." I pulled out another document which brings me to the Hendersons. "James, Sarah, I've examined the numerous complaints against you from other residents. The environment you have created is hostile. The discriminatory remarks, the efforts to evict families who don't fit your criteria. It all violates your lease restrictions." Sarah's face had turned white instead of red. "You wouldn't risk it. I'm exercising my right to terminate your lease, effective immediately. The property is yours to leave within 30 days. The silence that followed was broken by a small sound. Someone was clapping. Then another individual joined in, and another. Soon half the room was applauding. I saw relief on faces I recognized from years of shared subtle humiliations at the Hendersons' hands. "This isn't over," James threatened, standing to leave our lawyers. "Will you?" "Attorneys will discover that everything is entirely lawful," Mr. Pierce interrupted. "Miss Mitchell, should I show them the documentation your grandfather kept of the lease violations over the years?" I wasn't finished, but the Henderson bounded out. "One more thing," I announced to the remaining residents on establishing a scholarship fund for local students and a community improvement program. The focus will be on making Maple Grove accessible to families of all income levels, while maintaining the quality of life for everyone. Over the next few months, Maple Grove transformed the Hendersons, moved out their mansion, converted into a community center with after-school programs. Other wealthy residents who couldn't accept the changes followed, making room for new families who brought fresh energy to the neighborhood. We preserved our small house just as it was. The mom finally got the garden she'd always wanted. Dad retired from teaching, but volunteered at the community center, mentoring kids who reminded him of his younger self. One evening, as I sat on our porch watching children play on lawns that had once been off-limits, I found an old photograph in my grandfather's papers. It showed him standing in front of Maple Grove decades ago, when it was simply vacant terrain. On the reverse, he'd written, "Develop something that matters." Sarah Henderson still lives in the city. Sometimes I see her at the grocery store driving a much more modest car. Nowadays, she constantly swiftly averts her gaze, but I see that she no longer exudes the same haughty dignity. Last week, I received a letter from a young girl who recently moved into the neighborhood with her single mother. "Thank you," she said, "for establishing a space where we don't have to feel humiliated." I have that note on my desk next to my grandfather's photo. He built something that mattered. Okay, not just properties and investments, but a legacy of justice. It's my time to continue it now. The affluent abandoned me. Wasn't just in real estate and bank accounts. It was in the lesson Dad taught me via this legacy, how riches isn't defined by the size of your house or the car you drive, but by the community you make and the lives you impact. As I watch Maple Grove flourish, growing more diverse and vibrant with each passing day, I think about how sometimes the greatest revenge isn't in making others suffer, but in creating something beautiful from the ashes of their cruelty. And in the end, that's worth more than all the mansions in the world. Story 3. Hello, my name is Nora, and I feel like I'm walking a tightrope in my family. My mother, my older brother Anthony, and his wife Riley live with me. We may appear to be a normal family from the outside, but on the inside there is conflict and underlying animosity. With a sophisticated degree and a well-paying career, Anthony is the family's pride and the golden boy. Riley's portrayal as a composed wife is flawless. She constantly manages to look encouraging while subtly escalating the conflict. I'm the one who remains at home in the meantime, doing everything from paying the bills to making sure our mother is comfortable. However, my efforts are frequently ignored. I've lived with my mother for years, and she's not shy about her fondness for Anthony. I think it would be preferable to live with Riley and your brother. At one point, she said something that struck a deeper chord than she knew. It appears that I will always be the family's underappreciated member, regardless of how much I offer emotionally or monetarily. But if I've learned anything, it's that hardship is a source of strength. Despite the difficulties in my experience, I am confident that I am more capable than they realize. When my father became very ill during my second year of college, my life took a sudden change. He needed ongoing care, and it soon became apparent that my mother, who wasn't good at taking care of the house, couldn't do it by herself. Although caregivers were employed, they were unable to meet all of the needs, so I had to fill in as necessary. In order to make sure my father was comfortable and had all he needed, I frequently had to dash between classes and home. It was difficult to juggle my education and caregiving, but I couldn't let him suffer. It was on one of these difficult days that I had an idea. After I graduated and began working, how would I take care of my father? I looked at other options because of the uncertainty. I took the ideas I was learning in my economics lectures and started researching internet business strategies. Soon after, I formed a partnership with friends who were IT and management experts, and we started a tiny internet company. In order to be close to my father, I decided to work remotely from home while the majority of our team worked from an office. I began making a substantial financial contribution to our household as the firm gradually gained traction. My father saw my commitment and smiled proudly at me one day when I assisted him with his prescriptions. He said, Nora, you've given up so much for this family. You've developed into a responsible, diligent lady. You have my admiration." His remarks had a profound effect on me, causing my eyes to water. His remarks made every sleepless night and tense day worthwhile, even if it wasn't often that my efforts were recognized. Notwithstanding the difficulties, I was able to provide for my family in ways I never would have imagined when I changed my professional goals and launched an internet company. Although it wasn't the route I had originally planned, it turned out to be one of development and resiliency. My father's acknowledgement served as a reminder that my efforts weren't in vain. despite the fact that my contributions were sometimes overlooked by others. With his keen mind and tenacity, my brother Anthony has always been the pride and pleasure of the family. After graduating from one of the best universities, he immediately got a renowned position. He looked to be exalted by his accomplishment, and my mother never squandered the chance to remind me. Anthony was off living his dream in the city, disconnected from the realities of our family life, while I stayed at home to balance taking care of others and growing my internet company. Not long after he got his job, Anthony completely cut off contact with us. He pretended that we didn't exist, stopped returning our calls, and disregarded our messages. He seemed to have severed all connections, leaving my father and I bewildered and wounded. Anthony had all he needed to achieve since my father had provided for him financially while he was in school. Anthony, however, was unappreciative. His silence was devastating, particularly at a time when my father's condition was getting worse and we needed all the help we could get. Then suddenly, Anthony made contact. After being disconnected for years, we were caught off guard by his unexpected contact, but it wasn't a cordial reunion. Rather, he called to request a wedding present of $99,000. His demand was bold as well as startling. Ever the devoted parent, my mother was apprehensive but open to the idea. She defended his request by stating that it is the responsibility of parents to assist their children in beginning a new life. My father had been listening in silence, but her remarks infuriated him. "What's the point of giving him anything?" my dad inquired. His voice was shaking with anguish and frustration. "He left us. He never came in at all, and now he wants us to pay for his wedding." I could feel my father's displeasure. Anthony's accomplishments had always made him proud, but this flagrant disrespect for family destroyed that pride. In an attempt to defend Anthony, my mother insisted that supporting him would improve ties within the family, but that didn't sit well with my father. While Anthony disappeared without saying anything, Nora has been here every day to help this family. "He now want money," he firmly stated. "He doesn't deserve a single penny." His normally serene voice was laced with wrath and anguish. The home was uneasy after the dispute. Unquestionably, my father was disappointed with Anthony, and for the first time, he publicly recognized the sacrifices I had made for the family. In addition to harming our father, Anthony's self-centered actions had revealed the brittle relationships in our family. His actions left a permanent scar on our already damaged relationships, and it was obvious that his priorities were elsewhere. The death of my father was as unexpected as it was devastating. When I went to see how he was doing one morning, he was not responding. I phoned for an ambulance in a panic, but it was too late. He had left. We had lost the man who had been my confidant, my support, and the one person who genuinely valued me. Words could never heal the emptiness left by his passing. However, I knew I needed to be strong. To properly bid him farewell, I soon discovered that I was on my own while the funeral preparations got underway. Instead of grieving, my mother, who ought to have been in control, appeared aloof. As if nothing had happened, she spent her time on her phone, browsing social media. "Nora, you take care of it," she remarked nonchalantly. "I'm too overwhelmed," leaving me to shoulder the logistical and emotional load. It hurt that she didn't care. However, I pressed on. I'm determined to pay tribute to my father. An unpleasant surprise emerged on the day of the burial. While others came to pay their respects, Anthony and his wife Riley arrived, both of them dressed too badly for the solemn event. Anthony casually walked in, drawing attention for all the wrong reasons. The uneasiness was exacerbated by Riley's ostentatious clothing and arrogant manner. But my mother smiled warmly at them, as though nothing were wrong. With an uncharacteristically upbeat tone for the situation, she replied, "I'm glad you're here, Anthony." To my surprise, she said, "We can now talk about your father's inheritance." The room's vibe changed abruptly. The morning guests were now seeing a family drama play out. Anthony, who never misses a chance, spoke out. "To be honest, I don't believe Nora should have any expectations. She has long been dependent on her father." I sensed the heat of everyone's gaze on me as he spoke in a sarcastic manner. I balled my fists but said nothing. I didn't want to spoil the day that was supposed to be dedicated to my dad. My mother added, as if she didn't realize it was incorrect at the time, "The family owns your father's possessions, and Anthony, his eldest son, is entitled to the most." It was difficult to accept that this discussion was taking place at a funeral. My father had put forth a lot of effort to support us, and now his legacy was being diminished to a little financial dispute. I gazed at the visitors, whose expressions were marked with disbelief and uneasiness. Some of them were whispering to one another, trying to understand the obvious disregard for the event. With my mother's encouragement, Anthony turned to me and said, "You've been a burden, Nora. I should be given what is legitimately mine." His spouse gave him a nod of approval. Her sneer is still annoying. I inhaled deeply, resisting the need to snap. This conversation is not appropriate at this time or location. Despite the chaos inside of me, I spoke firmly and steadily. "We are not here to quarrel about inheritance. We are here to respect Dad." Anthony snorted, but remained silent. However, my mother was clearly annoyed, as though I had interrupted her plans. Riley left the burial early, allowing me to complete what they had so heedlessly interrupted, and after a few more uncomfortable minutes, Anthony moved near my mother and muttered something before the two of them. I couldn't help but feel a mixture of grief and rage as I stood beside my father's coffin. I was grieving the loss of the one person who genuinely cared about me, and rage at the self-centeredness that had eclipsed his last goodbye. I had to pick up the pieces by myself, since it was obvious that my family had broken irreparably. But if I had learnt anything from my father, it was to be resilient, and I planned to carry on in his honor, regardless of how challenging the path ahead may be. When Anthony made the decision to claim his alleged rights as the eldest son, the inheritance battle started. He was quite explicit about his allegation after the burial. "I own this house." Standing in the living room as though he already claimed the space as the oldest son of his father, he declared, "I was born with it." Riley, his wife, was standing next to him, nodding in agreement with her typical arrogant look. Sitting on the couch, my mother watched in silence. Her lack of protest says 1,000 words. I inhaled deeply, my feelings seething under the surface. I had been the one to support this family financially for years, looking after my father when no one else would. But now, here came Anthony, who had not been seen in years, claiming what he felt was rightfully his. His bluster would have been amusing if it weren't so enraged. "Anthony," I spoke in a forceful yet composed tone, "you don't own this house. Mom doesn't own it either. It's mine legally." There was silence in the room. Anthony's arrogant expression wavered, and Riley briefly appeared surprised. "What are you discussing?" When Anthony did inquire, his voice was brimming with incredulity. "I'm referring to the fact that prior to his death, Dad left me this house," I answered, refusing to back down. Since I was the one caring for him and providing for this family, he transferred title to my name. Anger reddened Anthony's cheeks. "That isn't feasible." "How come he would do that? You're not even employed. You've been squandering here." Even though his remarks made my palms shake, I remained unfazed. "Freeloading." I shot back, raising my voice a little. "Do you realize how much money I spent on this house while you were out in the city enjoying your life? I was present to ensure that Dad had the attention he needed, keeping this house running and paying the bills." I looked to my mom in the hopes of even a passing nod, but she looked away. Even more painful than Anthony's charges was her silence. It seemed as though she didn't value any of the sacrifices I had made. "I'll remind you," I went on, speaking steadily once again. "Mom's spending habits caused Dad's money to run out a long time ago. Subsequently, I began contributing $3,000 per month to sustain the home. Dad was aware that I was the only one he could trust. For this reason, he ensured that the house would remain in my name." As I spoke, a recollection sprang to mind. I recall the day my dad informed me about the relocation. "Nora," he had said. He spoke in a faint but determined voice. "I'm concerned about your safety. I trust you to act morally since you have done so much for this family." I was strengthened then by their words, and I am strengthened today. But Anthony wasn't prepared to give up. "This is unfair," he yelled. "I am the oldest son. I'm worthy of this mansion. How can a family be so treacherous to their own blood? A sour chuckle escaped my lips. Betrayal, I repeated. Anthony, you left us for years. When Dad was ill, you didn't even bother to check on him. Your abrupt return is the sole act of treachery here. Believing that you can steal something that isn't yours. Whispering something I couldn't hear, Riley pulled at Anthony's arm, obviously uncomfortable. With a low defensive tone, my mother eventually broke her quiet. Perhaps we should live together, Nora. Your father would have approved of it. I gave a hard shake of my head. No, Mother. Dad trusted me. Therefore, he wanted me to have this house. Anthony and you have only demonstrated self-centeredness, and I will no longer allow you to take advantage of me. My resolve had been strengthened by their treachery. This was more than simply a home. It represented my years of sacrifice and my father's faith in me. I wasn't going to give it to people who only thought about family when it was convenient for them. I felt genuinely powerful for the first time in years, prepared to leave their toxic grip and start a life that I wanted. Now was the moment to escape. I was leaving after years of sacrifice and unrecognized accomplishments when I made a decision that would alter everything. Standing in the home's living room, which was the scene of many traumatic events, I turned to face Riley, Anthony, and my mother. When I made my announcement, their expressions were a mixture of amazement and incredulity. I firmly said, I've had enough. All I've gotten in exchange for years of helping this family is treachery and contempt. I'm finished. I'm ending my relationship with you and leaving this house. Anthony leaned back in his chair and sneered. Nora, where will you even go? You've been forced to play the martyr all your life. I looked him in the eye without flinching. Here's where you're mistaken. This has been in the works for a while. I'm moving overseas and selling the house. Surrounded by individuals who only regard me as a burden, I don't intend to stay here. My mom's eyes became wide with shock. This home isn't sellable. Our family has owned it for many years. We haven't lived there for a while. I gave a chilly response. When Dad passed ownership to me, it became mine. He had faith in me to handle it. Currently, I'm deciding to let things go. Even though there was silence in the room, I could sense the tension building. Riley and Anthony glanced at one another, and my mother appeared to want to quarrel but was at a loss for words. I started packing that night while I packed up memories and folded clothes. A wave of feelings swept over me. I reflected on all the times I had stayed up late to balance my studies and caregiving, only to be met with apathy. I thought back to my father's words of support, the infrequent affirmations that kept me going. And I reflected on all the ways Anthony and my mother had taken me for granted. With every year that goes by, their selfishness gets worse. But a growing sense of relief coexisted with the bitterness. I was taking back my life by leaving, a life that had been eclipsed by their expectations and demands. I experienced hope for a future I could control for the first time. Through my uncle, who had always been a quiet support system, I completed the sale of the house. He acknowledged my motivations and promised to take care of everything. I purchased a one-way ticket to a tropical location after the sale was finalized. It had always been my dream. It was my opportunity to make a fresh start and escape the poisonous atmosphere I had spent so much time in. I experienced a strange mixture of liberation and sadness as I locked the door for the last time. The house had represented my growth and my hardships, but as I walked away, it no longer defined who I was. In addition to physical property, I left behind the burden of a family that had never really appreciated me. I was going to take full advantage of this new beginning. I boarded a plane to a tropical country that had always been a far-off dream, relieved of the burden of my previous life. With a sense of promise, the warm sun, soft breeze, and colorful scenery welcomed me. This was my new beginning, a location free from my family's expectations and burdens, where I could at last live for myself. It took some getting used to during the first few weeks. I rented a tiny apartment with big windows that let in the sound of the waves, close to the beach. Every morning started with coffee and fresh fruit on the balcony, while the sun rose over the sea. The tense atmosphere of my former home was a far cry from this. I had not felt at peace in years until I came here. I was able to adapt to my new life by establishing a routine. I worked on my internet business during the day, which gave me the financial flexibility I required to take this action. The afternoons were spent meeting people from all walks of life, exploring local markets, and sampling exotic cuisine. The people there were friendly and hospitable. Their relaxed back demeanor reminded me of the significance of slowing down and embracing life's simple pleasures. One evening, as I strolled down the coastline, the golden hues of the setting sun shining on the ocean, I found myself pondering about my voyage. The agony of my family's mistreatment still persisted, but it no longer defined me. I had acquired vital things from those difficulties: lessons about resiliency, self-worth, and the significance of setting limits. For years, I must sacrifice my own aspirations to support a family that never fully respected me. But those sacrifices had turned me into someone strong and independent. My father's faith in me, while a brief flare of light in the gloom, had been a turning point. It reminded me of my value and gave me the strength to break out. Now I was embracing my freedom, setting me a life where I was in charge. The obstacles I endured had taught me to prioritize my own pleasure and to surround myself with people who appreciated and respected me. The future was no longer a source of dread, but one of exhilaration and unlimited possibilities. As I stood on the beach watching the waves wash over the coast, I felt a deep feeling of thankfulness for the strength I had discovered, for the prospects ahead, and for this amazing new chapter. Life had tried me, but I had come out stronger, more ready to accept the freedom and joy that I had always earned. I was excited to explore where this fresh beginning would lead me to return to my former life. It was inevitable that my family would fail. Without me to discreetly cover the financial gaps, Anthony Riley and my mother had always lived over their means. They were swept up in their carelessness. After I departed, news came in through my uncle, who watched them closely but from a distance. Their opulent way of life quickly crumbled under the weight of their growing debt. Evicted from the property I sold, Anthony and Riley had taken up residence in a tiny, claustrophobic flat in the city. They had to work part-time jobs to cover their basic costs as their money rapidly dried up. In the meantime, my mother, who had always loved going on trips and going shopping, was having a hard time adjusting to a much more economical way of living. They started to get persistent calls from debt collectors at their door, endangering the life they had created. Entitlement and illusion were disintegrating. In an attempt to stay afloat, they took out loans from dubious lenders, but this only made matters worse. Their financial situation worsened with each poor choice, and their interpersonal ties became more strained. Now, the once proud family that had disregarded my efforts was barely surviving. Personally, I had no desire to go back to such poisonous setting. Every now and again, my uncle gave me an update. There was a hint of silent disapproval of their behavior in his voice, but I stayed out of the way. I had consciously decided to put my happiness first and start my own life. They had created their own problems, and I didn't want to be dragged back into their turmoil. I thought about the irony of it all a lot. The same individuals who had made fun of me for working quietly and keeping at home were now fighting for their lives. I had a bittersweet feeling of finality rather than schadenfreude. For years, I had provided them my support, yet I was treated with treachery and apathy. I was now free to live a peaceful, purposeful life, while they dealt with the fallout from their decisions. I had a deep feeling of satisfaction as I strolled down my new home's coastline. Although my path had been difficult, it had brought me to a position of strength and self-reliance. I didn't regret anything. My family's demise was their own fault, and I was at last content, concentrating on my joy and the better times to come.